I didn't need that.
You didn't.
Oh!
Okay, here we go. Yes, good morning once again to everybody. Good morning to you, Timothy, again. Of course, this time on camera, in front of the camera. Thank you for finding your gooseneck and for being in front of the camera, not behind it this time. So this is the 142nd episode of Japanese Politics One-on-One with Timothy Langley, CEO of Langley-S.Korea. If I can say something, the best consultancy on public affairs here in Tokyo. And we are going to walk again through the latest happenings in Japanese politics and how they have impacted different aspects of business life here in Japan. So without any further ado, Timothy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Maya, and welcome everybody to the 142nd consecutive Sunday together. Thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate you joining us every Sunday, waking up early, getting a cup of coffee, and joining in, not just only on the briefing, but on the Q&A. And as Maya has kind of surveyed many of our audience, people have told us, a little bit less on the briefing and a little bit more on the Q&A, because that's where all of the heat and light is produced. So following that recommendation, if you feel differently, please let Maya know. And by all means, stay along for the Q&A session as well. So as Maya was opening up, we have a new series that's starting on Monday. Isn't that right, Maya? Did you know, a series on LinkedIn? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Okay, yes. So the series is about different public policies that impact everyday life of people here in Japan, but also foreign residents in Japan. And the series is going to run on Langley-S.Korea's account on LinkedIn. So there are a couple of questions there, a couple of stats as well. So if you're interested, please follow the account there, comment and hit like, or you can also tell us what you would appreciate if it is talked about, and so that we can actually prepare other videos about it. Okay.
Thank you very much. Always hitting Kaizen. Boy, she's pushing the envelope. Thank you very much, Maya. So the Prime Minister opened this last week on Monday with his looked forward to, his hoped for State of the Union address. He wanted to do that on Friday. That is why they opened the Diet on Friday before the election, which was this time last week. He wasn't able to do that. He wasn't able to pull that off. The opposition parties came back at him very strongly and said, you're just going to use this opportunity so that you win in the two by-elections on Sunday. We don't want that. We oppose that. And he gave up. I don't know why he gave up. He should have stuck to it. The LDP, not as a consequence, but they won one and they lost one. They won the lower house seat in Nagasaki number 4, where Sasebo is located, and they lost in the upper house election, which is a combined district. The two districts were combined for the upper house in 2016. They lost that one to the opposition party. So kind of the fireworks started on Monday. He gave a very elaborate speech. It's the economy stupid, play off on James Carville's comment with Bill Clinton. It's the economy stupid, focus on the economy. And the Prime Minister came out very strongly. I'm here, I'm with you, I'm working on the economy. Nothing else is important to me, in a sense of the word. People were quizzing him about what we're going to do with defense spending, what we're going to do with the yen rate, things like that. And he just reiterated, I'm now focused on the economy. I'm not focused on a potential snap election, which is hot on people's minds, coming off of the by-election as well, winning one, losing one. There's not much wind in the sails for a snap election. it doesn't look like it. I'm not the only one that's saying it, that there will not be a snap election before the end of the year. People were somewhat hoping that that might happen. And the fact is that the prime minister, if he intends to stay prime minister beyond his term of office as the LDP president, which ends in October of next year, he must have a snap election, and the LDP must do really well in that election. Otherwise, if he doesn't have a snap election, he goes all the way over. Maya, can you turn your mic off, please?
Absolutely.
I can hear your cat meowing. If he doesn't hold a snap election and he goes all the way to the LDP election for presidency, he'll probably lose, and we'll have a new prime minister. So that's what he's dealing with now. And that's why he's totally focused on the economy, because he understands that the voting public is really upset with him, and the declining amount of money that they are being paid in salaries compared to the rise in prices is really killing them. And his approval rating, as you might have noticed, is the lowest it's been since he was elected. So that's another thing that's going on with him. Japan, South Korea, and U.S. relations are really roaring. There was a show of force this last week after we finished our briefing last week. The joint air forces of the three countries did a show of force in South Korea. They had a B-52 bomber flying in formation. This is the first time for a B-52 to be that close to North Korea. It really rattled their feathers. But it comes on the heels of the Ronald Reagan nuclear-powered aircraft carrier also visiting Busan 2 weeks ago. So this increasing development of U.S., Japan, South Korea military alliances is continuing to grow. And I think it's having a bit of an effect on relations between Japan, South Korea, and China. So as you might have been following, China is considering having a three-way summit between South Korea and Japan before the year is out. This is pretty significant because China is the largest trade partner for both of those countries. Although the security partnership with the United States is their strongest, it's really a delicate balance for these three countries working in tandem. Also, on the diplomatic front, Anthony Blinken was in China. The Chinese foreign minister is in San Francisco this week, talking about a potential summit. Not really a summit, but there's an ASEAN conclave in San Francisco in late November, and the possibility of Premier Xi joining that and meeting with President Biden is very high. They're putting high marks on the possibility there. So, you know, with what's going on in Israel, what's going on in Ukraine, the Russians, trying to parlay more ammunition out of North Korea in exchange for missile technology, that sort of thing. Things are building up in a lot of different areas. So this potential a breakthrough with the President of the United States, the Premier of China meeting is pregnant with opportunity. President Biden wants to run. He wants to be president again with the election beginning to heat up. So you never know. There could be some real possibilities made. But the show of force between the United States, South Korea, Australia, the Brits, all of these things is really beginning to culminate. And it's so unfortunate that we've got this problem in Israel too, because that could be the spark point for something that initially is regional, but will quickly spread to potentially global proportions. So we're watching that very closely. But as for the Japanese, they seem to be standing firm with the United States, and this relationship with South Korea really is unprecedented. You'll remember that South Korea and Japan flew out several people from Israel last week. About maybe 20 or so were flown out by Japan. They were flown out to Djibouti by the Japanese Air Force. I'm sorry, by the Japanese commercial carrier, I don't know which carrier it was, but it was probably Japan Airlines. And to be in a different country, fairly close to the action, but out of the action, the Japanese citizens paid 30,000 yen for that opportunity. On the other hand, Korean Airlines flew out their expatriates, many people who were in Israel, and they wanted to get the hell out of there. They flew them to Seoul. 50 Japanese jumped on too for free. Everybody flew for free to get back to Seoul. And this is, it's, I think, a real compliment to South Korea to have done that. I don't know why the Japanese insisted on charging their citizens some yen for the pleasure, but they also weren't home free. They were in a contiguous state. But still, the relations between Japan and South Korea is really beginning to take hold. There are some religious artifacts that were returned just this last week as a show of good faith. I don't know if it was good faith or not. I mean, the religious artifacts were probably stolen and brought to South Korea. They were returned just this, or the Supreme Court ruled that they belonged to the Japanese and they would be returned. But there's a lot of things that are going on now that probably wouldn't have been possible earlier. So, hats off to the United States for the diplomatic effort, for Japan, South Korea, the United States coming together for G7, the Hiroshima summit, and things like that. So it is beginning to look like it's taking hold. On the other hand, the Chinese and the Philippine fisheries are really starting to butt heads. There's been some collisions between Philippine fisheries, fishing vessels, and Chinese Coast Guard. So it could be a flashpoint there. So we continue to watch that. You might not know that organ transplants until just recently were illegal in Japan. And there's been a recent development in organ transplants because the law was changed in about 1991. And in fact, the individual who hired me out of law school, Nakayama Taro, who was a medical doctor and who became a member of the upper house, he was the spearhead for changing the law so that organ transplants could be done in Japan. And he did this for a lot of different reasons, but one of the reasons was his good friend, Kono Taro's dad, was having kidney failure, and his son wanted to donate his kidney to his father. They changed the law, not specifically as a result or as a consequence of that, but he was able to do that. The first transplant that occurred in Japan was between Kono Taro and his father. So that's an interesting piece of Japanese history and also legal history. But now they're considering the transplant of organs from people who are brain dead or who have been considered, comatose and unrecoverable. So the law is beginning to expand a little bit here. You would think that with the skill and the technology possessed by Japanese doctors in the medical profession here, that organ transplants would be a big deal. But in fact, most people are traveling to the United States, Mexico, South Korea to get these operations done. And it seems to be a pretty big deal. So just a tip of the hat to the Ministry of what is it? The Ministry of Health and Welfare. Did you know that Japan's largest lobby? So I'm working in a lobbying firm. There are very few lobbying firms that address the issues that foreign capital companies have in Japan. There's just a handful of them, but Japan has its own lobbying firms too. And most of them are run through associations. So the Americans have the American Chamber of Commerce, which could be considered to be a lobbying organization. It's kind of not, it could qualify as a lobbying kind of organization. But the Japanese too have their associations, and the largest Japanese lobby is the Japan Automobile Manufacturers Association. It is huge, and it really does dictate how policy moves and how trade deals are done. That's why the automobile industry is so dominant in the economy here. The Japan Auto Show just opened up this last week. It is one of the biggest and most looked forward to Tenjikai, these expositions that occurs in Japan. And the one in Japan is among the top ones in the world for automobile exposition, for showing what's going on in new technology. So if you're a car guy in Japan, definitely you'll be visiting the car show, the Tokyo Motor Show. The lobbying group, the Japan Automobile Manufacturers Association, decided that the Japan Motor Show was a little bit of a throwback and maybe not representative of what they actually do in Makuhari, and they changed the name of it to the Mobility Show. So that tells you, how much power they have. Nobody else has done that. This is the first time. So if you have a chance, go out and visit Makuhari. It is a huge exposition taking on 3 of those giant exhibition halls, and it's really interesting to go out there. But the Japan JAMA, the Japan Automobile Manufacturers Association, is full of lobbyists and technicians and policy nerds who help the Japanese government and the LDP, work their way through policies on trade, on importation, on emissions, and that sort of thing. So it's something very, very important to watch out for. Mitsubishi, speaking of cars, has decided, in a kind of a pretty much amazing but somewhat representative view, they're going to pull out of China. So Mitsubishi builds cars in Japan. They've been doing gangbusters ever since, for the last 2 decades, selling a lot of cars in China. And they have decided, due to a lot of trade friction and the supply woes and just the discrimination that is being suffered upon by Japanese companies. During the release of the Fukushima water, the Japanese embassy in Beijing received more than 15,000 prank calls and harassing calls a day during the lead up to that. So that doesn't happen just by citizens picking up the phone and calling. It is an organized effort. So not as a direct relation to that, but Mitsubishi has decided to pull out, and that's a big deal, because when you pull out, you basically leave a lot of your machinery and the technology there. You can't go into China and build a manufacturing plant unless you have a Chinese partner. So the Chinese partner would take over the rest of that, pennies on the dollar, but it is pretty significant. The relations between China and Japan have been worsening for a long time. They just had the 45th anniversary of the friendship treaty between Japan and China this last week. And the Japanese are working very hard to have this summit with Xi. They are making progress. It looks like they might have the possibility of the Prime Minister and Xi actually meeting before the year is out. So if you're looking at the Chinese calendar for the premiere there, it looks very packed too. One of the other things that happened there, in somewhat shocking news, is China's number 2 died suddenly just this last week of a heart attack, apparently in Shanghai. Apparently he died of a heart attack, but he did die in Shanghai. A lot of questions are being raised there. He was not really close with Xi. He was the number 2 potential contender. They were contenders earlier in their careers. Xi eclipsed him, kept him by the side, gave him other different responsibilities. He was in charge of the COVID response, in fact. But his death is somewhat curious. There's been a couple of movements in China. The foreign minister was newly appointed. The ambassador to the United States was changed out, as he had a child out of wedlock while in the United States. That never happens, does it? And so he has disappeared from television cameras. So there's a lot going on there, a lot going on between, just typically within China. So there's a lot of movement going on there, and hopefully the United States can pull a rabbit out of the hat and begin to close the tensions. Also, it's interesting to point out that Japan is falling in its economic world ranking. Germany is going to eclipse, or has eclipsed, Japan as the number 3 economy. It's the United States, China, and then it was Japan for about 14 years until just this last week. And Germany is taking over the third slot, Japan will be in number 4. And this is largely based on a dollar valuation of the economy. So with the dollar Japan rate now pegged at around 150 yen to the dollar, I think that's had an impact, a negative impact on Japan's rating. But at the same time, we've been in the doldrums for 20 years throughout the Abe administration as well, even in fact, with Abenomics in consideration and doing a certain amount of good. The economy just has not taken off. And we see this with the yen dollar rate. And we also see this with the yen yield for the Japanese government bonds and the difficulty that the Bank of Japan Governor Ueda has in trying to keep these things calm, and the competition between the United States Treasury and the Bank of Japan. It is very complicated, but Japan is not going to stay at number 4 very long. India is coming up very quickly. It is 2023 now, towards the end of the year. By 2026, they predict that India will come into number 4. Japan will slip to number 5. And then within a year or a year and a half, it'll slip to number 6 or 7. So that's what the economists are saying. And as you might know, the Japanese yen breached 151 yen to the dollar a week ago, Monday. That's right, a week ago, Monday, it eclipsed 151 yen to the dollar. And we know from experience that the Bank of Japan rushes in to support the yen. You might remember this time last year in September and October, the Japanese government pumped in more than a trillion yen? 60 billion yen they pumped into the economy. This is money they just put in. They're not getting anything in return for it. They push this into the market. They buy Japanese yen, and it makes the yen a little bit more valuable. But it took them 60 billion US dollars to achieve that. That is just astounding. And so with the yen hitting 151 yen twice just these last 2 weeks, it looks like there might be another serious intervention by the Bank of Japan. Traders in the market are sitting on the edge of their seats, wondering what they're going to do. So if there is serious action by the Bank of Japan, some people are going to benefit and some people are going to lose. And as you might know, when the yen goes to that kind of value, or when the Japanese government intervenes, there's a teeter-totter effect that goes on with the bond market here in Japan and the bond market in the United States. The Japanese are attempting to keep zero interest rates on these bond prices. So with the price of US Treasuries at about 4 I have the number here, it's 4.96%. So they get a rate of return 4.96. And for the Japanese bonds, they're getting 0.835%. This 2 weeks ago, the rate went from 0.83, it actually went to 0.86. The Bank of Japan got a little bit nervous and they intervened very quickly. So this is a huge gap, and that is why the vast majority of US Treasury bonds are held by the Japanese. Let me see how much is there. I don't have the figure right here, but over this last year, the Japanese yen has lost more than 12% to the US dollar. So there's a lot of complications going on there. When the Prime Minister spoke to the Diet, when he opened the Diet on Monday, gave his first speech, the State of the Union speech, it was about the economy and how he's going to bolster it. And we predicted here that Japan needs to kind of shock the senses of the economy and the voting public and the people who are suffering from high inflation. So he came forward with that. It wasn't as shocking as I had expected. He said he would reduce tax rates and he would offer cash handouts. And both of these things need to happen in a very short order. He created a bit of a firestorm. So he had the State of the Union address on Monday, and then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, there was lots of budget hearings in the Diet. And if you've ever been in the Diet, the largest committee room is the budget room. And this is the room where the Prime Minister and his cabinet are pelted with questions. They stand up, they answer their questions. And this is what happened throughout this last week. the questioning starts with the largest political party, the LDP, questioning the prime minister, and he went through that. And then it's the first largest opposition party, and that's the Constitutional Democratic Party. And then they go step by step to each of the political parties. Komeito is the coalition partner with the LDP, but since they're not the largest political party, they're maybe 6 or 7, they would come in and have their questions too. Some of it supporting the LDP or the administration, and some of it criticizing it because they want more money for the people who are less fortunate or in the lower economic rungs, as you would expect from Komeito. So they have all of this splayed out. It doesn't finish. It didn't finish just this last week. It will continue briefly into this week. And then on the 2nd, which is, I believe, maybe Thursday, Maya, I'm not sure. But the LDP will, the cabinet will promote their supplementary budget and their recommendations for the economic package that the prime minister is promoting. And that will happen on the 2nd. And then we have exactly 30 days, no, maybe 40 days until this extraordinary session of the Diet ends. It'll end on December 13th. So in that period of time, there'll be a lot of debate. There'll be recommendations that go up about cutting the taxes, when they're going to cut the taxes. Are they going to continue the subsidy on gasoline and fuel prices? And that looks like a solid yes. And on cash subsidies. So mostly the debate is, we need something immediate. Cash works best. Just give people who are in a certain economic bracket more money. They've already earmarked 40,000 yen, which is yomaen, to qualifying households. That doesn't seem like a whole lot, but when your income is at a certain point, it does make a difference, and it'll be pretty immediate. And also tax cuts for residential tax and for income tax. The problem with granting tax cuts is that it takes a bit of legislation to do that, and the legislation is already in place. And part of the criticism that the prime minister is receiving is that doing that doesn't produce an impact right now. We need an impact right now. The economy is beginning to stall out. The yen is increasingly getting weaker, and the prime minister needs to take bold action there. And he's promised bold action. The only problem with the current prime minister is that he does talk a wild talk. He speaks very eloquently about new capitalism, about the virtuous cycle of increased investment and increased wages, and how this bolsters each other in a virtuous cycle. But coming to details with that is always a little bit skinny and not his forte. And so he's getting peppered with that. We hope that by November 2nd, the details will be there and it'll be more hotly debated. So we'll report on that next week, next Sunday. Let me see where we are. The OPEC summit in San Francisco, November 16th and 17th. It's going to be a busy month until the closing of the year. And this is the summit where Premier Xi is looked forward to coming to the United States, San Francisco, for a potential meeting with Biden. I think that's going to happen. As it turns out, the prime minister's approval rating is again at his lowest part of his administration. It doesn't look like it's going to increase anytime soon, even with the handouts, even with the State of the Union address that had lots of flowers and bells and whistles on it. Everything will come out on November 2nd, and then the debate on that. But the prime minister is suffering in a lot of different ways. His cabinet approval rating, as we know, is not high, even though he went through a shuffle just less than a month ago. And this last Sunday, there was an election, a by-election, for an upper house member and a lower house member. The lower house member was an LDP politician who had been formerly a minister of state. He died while in office, and so under the Diet rules, a replacement needs to be held by a by-election within 15 days. 50 days of such an event. The seats can't remain vacant like that. And there's in a, let me see, in Kochi, Tokushima, there was an upper house Diet member who was also LDP, who got into a scuffle with his Diet secretary. It became a big brouhaha. You're not supposed to be doing that to your staff. And he was kicked out of office. He lost his office and lost his badge as well. So he was ejected as the upper house member for that joint district. So it's two districts that joined in a kind of an amalgamation of gerrymandering district seats in 2016. Not a whole lot to brag about for either of these. The opposition can't really sing from the rooftops that they kicked the LDP's ass, because they kind of didn't. And similarly with the lower house, the LDP can't say, you know, this means that the prime minister should be prime minister for the rest of the century, because it was not a good solid win. And so let me just go into that a little bit. In Nagasaki number 4, which is the home of Sasebo, so that's where the Marine base is. The maritime Japanese forces are there. The U.S. Aircraft carrier is there. They have huge forces there. The Minister of Defense Kishida went there during the election campaign to talk about how important it was for people to vote, and how important it was for people in the defense ministries to vote for the LDP, because we're on your side. He got into a little bit of trouble there. There was calls for his resignation. It didn't really amount to much this last week, but it still has a little bit of wind going in that direction. But the LDP won. The earlier Diet member who held that seat was in the Kishida faction. He died in office, and the LDP supported Mr. Kozo Kaneko, who did win. He's 40 years old, and he's a third generation politician. So his dad was in the parliament, a minister of state, very popular, and this is his son. So he's running for office, and he won. And the reason why there's not much to crow about is because even earlier in the Kishida faction, he ran for this lower house seat, and he won by just a very slim margin, less than 10,000 votes against his opposition. This time, Kaneko won by about 7,000 votes for that. And with less than, let me see, the turnout was 42% turned out to vote. And this is the lowest it's been, actually 10 points lower than the lowest that prefecture has had, or that election district has. And let me see, it's the last election was 52%. So it's 42% who voted now. And that just shows that people are apathetic. When that typically happens, when the voter turnout is low, when it rains, the LDP typically does very well, because the LDP is full of staunch conservatives, and also their coalition partner, Komeito. When Komeito says, we need you to vote, their members, their acolytes, the people who follow Komeito, many of them are Soka Gakkai members, and they follow what is being instructed of them or advised to them. And so it usually does, the LDP usually does better in that kind of a low turnout. So in a different situation, we don't know how the LDP would have done, but it's a win just by the squeak of the teeth. In Kochi, Tokushima, this is the upper house seat. Hajime Hirota, he's 55 years old. He won. He was supported by the Constitutional Democratic Party, and he was he was a lower house member earlier. He was Constitutional Democratic Party member earlier. He gave that up to, he ran in this election as let me see, a Constitutional Democratic Party, and he defeated Ken Nishiguchi, who is 56 years old, who was a prefectural assemblyman. So you would have thought maybe just given the locality and the power of being in the district, talking to the people all the time, that the local Kochi assemblyman would have a little bit more of a push. But the LDP, the Constitutional Democratic Party, put a lot of weight on that, and they won that seat. So their power has increased a little bit. The Constitutional Democratic Party as the #1 opposition party, but it's not a win that's really something you can wave a stick at. The turnout there was 32%, and that's 14 points lower than it was earlier. And it's an election district for the upper house. The lower house has smaller districts. There are many more lower house election districts than there are upper house. This one was an upper house district, and the two prefectures were joined, Kochi and Tokushima, in 2016. So he's one of the two upper house members of that district, and the LDP came away on a squeak of that. I have, let me see, there's only one other thing that I'd like to mention to you. So we've had some by-elections, and people frequently ask me, so how is a by-election run, and why is there a by-election? And a by-election is run whenever there's somebody who dies in office or resigns or is kicked out of office, they lose their badge, that sort of thing. And we have another one that's coming up because the mayor of Koto, Koto ward in Tokyo has resigned, and she was Yayoi Kimura. She was a lower house member who gave up her badge to run for mayor, and she won the mayoral race. So she gave up her lower house seat. She was LDP, by the way, and she ran for mayor. And almost immediately, the knives came out, and she was criticized for election campaign violations. And it came out because they went into court and they did the investigation. It came out that she did, in fact, pay an internet company 140,000 yen to run a YouTube ad that said, "Vote for me," or something along those lines. And you're not supposed to do that. So we don't know how many votes she garnered as a consequence of that. She had 380 views of that YouTube video, but still that's considered a no-no. She was kicked out. So Koto ward has to find a new mayor, and they have to do that within 50 days. So there'll be a by-election there. And that's unfortunate for her because she was a lower house member from the LDP twice. And so she had a lot of constituents that were pulling for her. So that's another thing of how Japanese politics works, how scandal, it's not quite scandal, it is kind of scandal, but also just for example, we haven't talked for a while about Bunshun and their power of generating animosity and consternation among the voting public towards people who are in public office. And they've had a real run with that, and there's more to report next week. There are a couple of things that are bubbling up that are going to hit the press, and it's a very exciting time now with the extraordinary diet session. Now it's a very brief one. They're talking about a lot of money. The prime minister is kind of on his heels, deflecting blows that are being well laid by the opposition party. And this gel between the LDP and Komeito, it's not really sticking as it used to under the Abe administration. So there are some problems there. And should it come to an election and the prime minister doesn't do well and the LDP loses votes, then the prime minister has to take responsibility for that. But also the LDP needs to figure out a way where their numbers, even though it was reduced because the prime minister didn't do as good a job and Komeito, maybe they lost some, they need to expand it by having at least 50% in the lower house so that they can control how budget hearings go and how bills are passed through the Diet. And that's when the Democratic People's Party could come up. So there's a lot of, kissy face that's going on between the LDP and the Democratic People's Party. We've reported on it in the past, but it is becoming a little bit more of an issue to watch out for, because it is a possibility that the Komeito wouldn't really appreciate. We like being the coalition partner. We get a lot more out of that. We get at least a cabinet portfolio. We get a cabinet seat, and we get to head one of the ministries. But if we have somebody else in here, even though they're smaller than us, it does take a little bit of the shine out of the political dynamic that we as Komeito hold. So there's a lot going on with this extraordinary session, and the supplementary budget that's going out. Is Komeito going to get all at once for the downtrodden and for the lower income, which a lot of them belong to Komeito? Or is the Prime Minister going to be successful in generating more energy into the economy so that the wages increase, or at least inflation decreases, so that relatively speaking, the value of wages increases? It's a really tough issue. And then finally, just in wrapping up, Maya, the automobile issue, we talked about it at the opening, about the largest lobbying organization in Japan being the Japan Automobile Manufacturers Association, and the Japan Mobility Show out in Makahari. I think, Maya, you and I are going to give a briefing on the automobile industry probably within the next week, on what the dynamic is with the automobile industry, how it propels the economy, and how much the Japanese economy is dependent on the Japanese automobile industry. And it has repercussions elsewhere that I'd like to get into. So we're going to talk about that in a more formal sense. Thank you, Maya.
Thank you, Timothy. Okay. So thank you for the briefing. And we have a couple of questions actually that have been asked on YouTube before. I wondered whether you would be willing to talk about, try to answer them. Did you hear me?
Yes, I did.
Oh, okay. Wonderful. Because we had a question on YouTube about Mr. Kishida's new capitalism and the committee actually on that new capitalism. So how does the committee operate, and what is its power? So
Great.
Yes.
Great question. And it's not something that we have talked about very frequently, but you might remember when the Prime Minister became Prime Minister, he talked a lot. He went to London. He talked about new capitalism. He had a beautiful speech about how his view on capitalism, and how we're going to, separate ourselves from Abenomics, and we're going to go into this new vein of capitalism, and it's the new capitalism. It's a new creation. And he set up a committee, of which he was the chair, which met weekly. This is a huge deal, to take that much time from the Prime Minister, for him to take responsibility, for him to sit at the head of that table, and to do it as aggressively as he is promoted. So you don't hear much about it, because I think people have investigated it and talked about how this duality of raising wages and having investment flow come in, so that people invest more into the economy. They invest into capital companies. The capital companies use that money to do more investment and to higher productivity and that sort of thing. And it comes into higher wages, and then this whole system begins to fulfill itself. I think he's still beholden to that idea, but you don't hear much about it, because I think it really hasn't taken much traction. I think the economists are not really very hopeful about that working. I mean, it's the economy, stupid. The Prime Minister said it himself. And so it's the yen dollar rate, it's the inflation, it's getting costs down, it's increasing the price of Japanese goods that are being exported. Because what's happening is the cost of Japanese goods being exported, their value is decreasing, and the cost of imported goods is increasing. And so that's kicked Japan out of slot number 3 and into slot number 4, and it's going to continue until the Prime Minister kind of gets the economy going here. So that's the status right now. Good question, though.
Yes, thank you very much for the clarification. And also, there was a question which is very, very specific. I don't know whether we can talk about it today or maybe next time. So the question is about Kane. Oh, no. I'm sorry for this. The question is about the electoral system. And what was it? It's such a difficult word, actually. Just a moment. Oh, yes, the seki hairitsu in the Japanese electoral system. So it is a kind of very specific question, and I think that it's really something that we can dive a little bit more into next week.
What is
Or
Seki Hairitsu? Can you explain what the term means?
yes, so this is the ratio of the margin of loss of an electoral candidate in a single constituent district. It is used to
Okay.
break when determining the representative of a proportionally represented district.
Okay. So we can touch on that now. Seki Hairitsu, Seki is seat, right? So
Yes.
Seki Hairitsu, what's the differential between winners and losers? And it is an amazing story. So the distinction between winners and losers in most of the election districts in Japan, I would say maybe 90% of them, that means that the person who holds the seat now is so prominent, nobody's going to touch him. Taro Aso, nobody's going to touch him in his district. You know, he's been a member of the Diet 15 times already. He's been Minister of State for the last 20 years. He's been nobody's going to touch him. But there are other members who have been in the Diet maybe 2 or 3, 4, 5 times, and every time they go into an election, it's a fight. And the distinction between the winner and the loser in every election under most of these races is less than 5%. So the election district that we just talked about in Kochi, the I'm sorry, not Kochi, but in Nagasaki number 4, the winner eclipsed the loser by 7,000 votes. So that's probably less than 1% of the vote. The winner was elected by less than 1% more votes than the loser. So the loser is pretty good. They could have won had there not been whatever, a slip up, or if they had spent a little bit more money, or if they'd kissed a couple more babies. And I think the vast majority of LDP seats are like that. And so when there's an election, Komeito, the reason why Komeito is such a darling colleague for the LDP is because members of Komeito vote in mass. They vote religiously. That's a pun, I think. They vote as they're being instructed by Komeito. LDP members also vote according to what the LDP says, but the LDP is a larger, more varied body. Komeito is a little bit more specific. It's as the philosophy of the founder and the philosophy of Soka Gakkai dictates, looking out for your fellow man, keeping things going, helping mothers and children, supporting social welfare, that sort of thing. That's distinctly different from the precepts of the LDP. But when the Komeito says, look, we're running in this election, or maybe there's a general election, and all of the seats, 700 seats of the lower house, are up for election, and they say, in this district we need you to vote for this candidate because maybe he's not a Komeito candidate, or maybe we don't have a candidate in this election district, but vote for the LDP. And the LDP can guarantee, they can rely on at least 20,000 votes. And without those 20,000 votes, that 1% or 2%, that's the distinction between the winner and the loser, falls apart. So you might remember, sorry, this is a little bit long-winded, but I hope it responds to the question. You might remember that the Komeito wanted a candidate in the election district 28, a new election district because of 1010, the gerrymandering. And in the election, they wanted their candidate to run in 28. And Mr. Hagiura had a friend, he wanted to run in 28. And since he is at that point, he was the election commissioner within the LDP, he got to decide. And it created a big brouhaha. And the Komeito said, forget it. We're not going to support any of your candidates in Tokyo if there's going to be an election. So if you're not going to let us have this candidate, then nowhere else, but maybe in the rest of the country, we might support you. That wasn't called into a test because the prime minister didn't call for a snap election. And so that kind of ultimatum was never exercised, but they did have, a kissy face. The prime minister made up with Komeito, and they decided, let's go ahead and share the votes that you would be generating in the Tokyo districts, and they made some concessions elsewhere. So the prediction is if the relationship between Komeito and the LDP sours, and the Komeito doesn't support the LDP will lose at least 60 seats. And that is huge. And that means the prime minister would have to resign. So I hope that explains part of the delicate balance between Komeito and the LDP, and why the LDP needs to accommodate Komeito's request for more money to the downtrodden, for tax incentives, for the things that the people who are more aligned with Komeito, they get a benefit of Komeito being in the government. So I hope that explains some of it. It is somewhat complicated, and I apologize for going so long about it.
No, but thank you very much for clarifying, because these are really details which are not,
they're not evident. No, they're not evident.
Yes.
And we only talk about it in passing. So if people are joining this briefing just periodically, once or twice, not every week, you're probably going to miss out on some of it. So tune in every Sunday.
Okay, indeed, tune in every Sunday. Okay, and we have a couple of other questions. One of them is on LinkedIn. Another one is in Clubhouse by Gabor. So I'll start with the one on LinkedIn, and it is from Hiroko-san. So she wrote, "One win and one lose for the LDP. How do the Prime Minister and his cabinet evaluate Mitsubichi's performance? It has kept her profile very low until the last moment of the campaign." Your thoughts on this?
Okay, that's a great question, Hiroko. Thank you very much for asking it. So for background, for those who don't understand, Miss Obuchi was one of the new members of the Kishida cabinet. She was appointed a month ago, and her slot was as election campaign chairman. So she slid in where Mr. Hagiura previously was. It's a high-level position. And for her to come in it's interesting. Her father was prime minister. She ran after his death, and she had a successful career until she received the ministerial portfolio of Meti Minister, and they nailed her for campaign violations, just like this mayor in Koto Ward, election campaign violations. I don't want to get too much into it. She drilled and destroyed some of her computers that held some of the collection of campaign funds to her office, kind of like what Hillary Clinton did. So she's got a little bit of a history there. 14 years she's been kept low, a low profile, and then she came up again. And so the responsibility for this election campaign for these next two was the first chance for her to showcase herself, and she's still under a little bit of investigation for campaign finances, unfortunately for her. But the knives didn't really come out too much for her as a consequence of losing that one upper house seat. I had expected it to just be an opportunity for the people who dislike her and want her not to be successful to come out, but apparently there are other things that are taking on the airwaves. We might hear a little bit more about it, but I think she's probably secure for the time being, because I didn't hear a whole lot of acrimony being lodged to her.
Okay, thanks for that. And then the next question from Gabor. It is about...
I thought Hiroko had 2 or 3 or 4.
Oh, maybe they will come a little bit later. Okay. So that's a prompt, Hiroko-san. So think about other questions. Okay. And then the question from Gabor is, can the present mayor of Kotoku, who stepped down, run again? Can he run again?
Yes.
Because once he stepped down.
She can run again, unless there is a conviction. She stepped down. Apparently the evidence is rather clear that she violated the campaign law. Miss Obuchi also violated the campaign law. There was no lawsuit. 2 of her diet secretaries took the blame and went to jail, and she's still a member of the diet. So with a ward, so there are 28 wards in Tokyo. She is the mayor of one of those wards. It is not a national diet seat. So you would think that maybe the restrictions on candidates running after resigning might be a little bit looser. But the fact is that she actually hasn't resigned yet. She will resign this next week to take blame and to quell the controversy. So it hasn't gone to the fact that she's been claimed to have violated the law and she has to pay a fine and she's going to maybe go to jail or something like that. It hasn't reached. She's resigned. She's taken responsibility for it. And so I think she's hoping to nip it in the bud so that it doesn't go any further. She shows contrition. And yes, she could run again, but I think, people have long memories. And the violation of, and it's not a huge violation. I mean, any violation is huge in politics, of course. But the fact that she spent, maybe $1,000 for a YouTube campaign that generated 380,000. Was it 380,000 or 38? Let me see. It generated, 380,000 views. So that doesn't mean it got 380,000 likes or comments. It's just views. So, Gabor, you can post a picture of you and your kids, visiting some exotic place in Japan, and you'll get 380,000 votes. If you put a funny hat on. So it's not that big a deal. But yes, her political career is not over. She, as I said, she was a lower house member for 2 terms. She's female. She's young. She's attractive. She's got, LDP backing. It's not the end of the road for her.
Okay, thank you for that. A couple of other questions, once again, on LinkedIn and also in Clubhouse. So I'll go in the order of receiving them. The first one is from Ricky Kaminsky. Ricky, thank you very
Hi,
much
Ricky.
for Clubhouse. With his question is, with the whole world debating and worrying about the situation in Israel, what has Japan's official reaction been?
Okay, so if you're following the press, the foreign minister is Kamikawa. She is, she's doing such a fabulous job. She was on TV the other day explaining Japan's position. And I think it is Japan is, and the prime minister wants to be the peacemaker. He wants to be the deal maker. He wants to be in charge of rulemaking. He wants people to come to Japan as kind of the peacemaker. He wants that slot to be kind of geared towards him. There are very few things, very few attributes that the Japanese can really hoist as really their pedestal. And one of them is nuclear proliferation, and particularly for this prime minister because he comes from Hiroshima. But also, since they have a peace constitution and they're not allowed to have offensive weapons, even though they sit in this very delicate tinderbox within the Asia-Pacific region, it's the number 3 economy in the world. It is vastly powerful, and it has a role to play. And the Prime Minister, Mr. Abe as well, was always looking for what's the best role for us to play. How can we assert our leadership? We want to be a member of the NATO kind of sphere of influence, even though NATO is not here in the Asia Pacific, and we'd like to have a permanent seat in the National Security Agency in NATO. So the current prime minister wants to be seen as the nation that can bring together these various opposing forces. So they have in the past supported the Palestinians and Israel. But I think, with the United States taking such a strong position on Israel, Japan also is relegated to following that example too. But with a couple of fine distinctions there. But I think the current foreign minister is, wow, she's doing such a great job, following on the heels of the former foreign minister, who is now very busily securing his seat in the gerrymandered seats in his election district in Yamaguchi. I hope that's somewhat responsive.
Yes, okay, I hope so too. And then What did I say that the next question is on LinkedIn? Yes, actually. Okay. So we have two questions from David, David Malitz. Thank you very much, Dr. Malitz, for being here with us. So the first one is, are you aware of strategies or plans to target young voters who have much lower voting rates than older people? This is the first one. And your thoughts on this?
The question is, am I aware of any plans within the LDP to generate more voter enthusiasm? Is that right?
Among the young generations, because they have lower voting rates. Yes, that is the question.
So yes, so within the LDP and within the Abe faction, in fact, the vast majority of members of, let's just talk about the Abe faction, the vast majority of members in the Abe faction have only 2 elections under their belt, maybe 3. But they're still like an ichinensei. Ichinensei means they've had 1 election under their belt, and basically they're gophers. They do things for other people who have 2 or 3 or 4 or more elections under their belt. They have committee chairs, that sort of thing. As a first year or first term member of the LDP, you're learning the ropes, you're doing things for people, you're generating favors, you're just trying to keep your nose clean and hopefully win in the second election. After you've won 3 elections, now it's kind of time for you to maybe get a committee seat, a chair seat. Some people have even become ministers of state in their 3rd or 4th term. But you have to be pretty outstanding to do that. It can be done. So with just, exclusively talking about the Abe faction, because it's the largest of all of the LDP factions, there is a contingent there that are younger people, younger members of the parliament who want to parlay the fact that they're young, that they're just, in the diet just 1 term or maybe 2 terms, and they're trying to generate a base of constituents. So in their election district, for example, and they see that even though it's the older people who, because the pyramid is inverted, the demographic pyramid is inverted, you still have a big section of younger voters that maybe your opponent who you beat in the last election, but you only beat him by a couple of thousand votes, how you can enhance that by going to the young voters. And it's kind of easy pickings because all you have to do in Japanese politics is show up. It's all about handshaking. It's all about being there. It's all about this one-on-one interaction. So the younger members probably have a little bit more time, a little bit more energy to reach out to these younger voters and, encourage them, number one, to vote, because the apathy is so high that they frequently don't vote. But if they do vote, they're more likely to vote for somebody who kissed their sister's baby, or that they know somehow personally, or who spoke at the university. So yes, there's a lot of effort going on there, not so much with the older and the more secure members of the parliament, because they can always rely on the older members of the population to continue to vote, because people continue almost invariably to continue to vote as they voted the last time, unless there's something untoward or distasteful that's happened, and they switch very quickly as a consequence of that. Or maybe Bunshun writes an article that's critical. Voters change very quickly. But yeah, getting the younger voters out and dispelling the apathy is probably one of the prominent duties of the younger members of parliament. But most of the members, they don't become members of parliament until they're in their early 30s. There are a couple of members who are 28, 29, which is the minimum age for a member of the lower house. But yeah, it's always a perennial problem to get it's not just the young people. I mean, there's general apathy in any event, but to get the younger people to actually care about it and to be concerned and to acknowledge that actually politics does have a role in your life. I mean, we have the same problem here in this briefing. A lot of people are not interested in Japanese politics because they say it doesn't have an impact on me. I'm working in a company, and Japanese politics doesn't doesn't impact me, and in fact it does. It's just a little bit further down the road that the impact comes, but it's good to keep your finger on the pulse, because it helps you predict what's going to happen, and the views of the Japanese administration with regard to issues that are important to you. So I hope that's somewhat responsive, David. Dr.
Yes.
David.
Dr. David Malitz, yes. And then there is one more question from David, and then we're going to move to Clubhouse, where Yuka is also waiting with a question, I believe, or two. So the next question from David is, how concerned is the LDP about the potential of the new populist party, Sanseitou?
I don't think they are.
Mm-hmm.
Sanseitou did not do very well in the last election. It really came up the first election where it showed up, the first two elections. It did create a little bit of a quirky kind of, who are these guys? And
Mm-hmm.
it actually plays off of your first question, David, because the Sanseitou is really full of the younger voters, and it's more vibrant. It's got a lot of energy, music, and kind of something you might have seen in the United States in the 60s and the 70s. So who knows? But it is just it's just a tiny little initiative that's going up, and I mean the major political parties, the major meaning that they are political parties that have been established, and there are 6 or 7 depending on how you count them, coming into to have a political party and to get a member of the Diet or get membership into the Diet is it's not an easy feat. So, if you have maybe 8 or 10 members of the Diet, now you're beginning to generate some real traction, but it takes a long time to get there. And I don't think anybody is that concerned with that political party, but let's see. And if I'm wrong, please point it out to me, David. I'd love to be educated.
Well, thanks for that. And then I would like to invite Yuka. Yuka, お待たせしました。
どういたしまして。Is that right response? Wait, how do I respond to the お待たせしました? Okay, no. I got confused. Okay, I thought I'm Japanese. Anyway, I have a quick comment and then 2 follow-up questions. I promise it's going to be very quick. Timothy, so this week for the first time, I've seen you posted on LinkedIn about the transcript of the previous session of this room.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yes.
So have you been doing that a lot, or that's the first time I've seen it? So if you didn't do that, I'm sorry I missed it, but that was great. That was a great summary or transcript. So I wanted to thank you for that.
Hey, thank you very much, Yuka. So Maya, you might remember, and you might have been one of the people that she reached out to. She reached out to a couple of the people in the audience and said, how can we make this thing better? How can we make it more dynamic to you? And she received like 6 recommendations that we're really implementing. One of them is, did you know this LinkedIn campaign that we're going to start tomorrow? And the other one was, Langley, why don't you stop blabbering so much and reduce you always say 30 minutes. You never talk for 30 minutes. You always talk for like 45 minutes or even an hour as
right.
you're teetering on your boat. So compress that, speak less, and expand more on the Q&A. So you might have noticed that we're doing a little bit of that. As I go through my notes, I jump through them very quickly as bullet points. I don't get too much into the weeds or on the details. And the other one was, why don't you, because I don't wake up to have coffee with you and the kids are screaming and I got other things to do. So I might listen on YouTube, but if you could tell me what you've talked about, that might be helpful. And so we started this, what, Maya, a week ago, 2 weeks ago?
2 weeks ago, yes.
Yeah. So we only started it 2 weeks ago. Thank you for taking note of that. But yeah, we got a really good reaction. We posted those bullet points up that this is what we talked about. If you're interested, please sign on Sunday mornings. And we got a really good reaction, a lot of good feedback from there. So thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, just in case, people in the audience haven't noticed that, so like, I think it's a good sort of like a relearning of what you have said. And sometimes you missed, I missed a 1 word or 2, but, but today, I learned politicians must kiss babies a lot because you said twice. So I'm learning something new, right? But thank you. So
So one of the other things, Yuka, before you go on, and talking about
Yeah.
kissing babies, one of the other things that people said is, I like the way Tim talks. I like the idiomatic phrases that he uses, and he uses words that I don't normally hear. So maybe he's 100 years old and he's using words from, the Elizabethan period or something like that. So kissing babies is an idiomatic phrase. Japanese politicians don't normally kiss babies, but I hope the essence of what I'm trying to convey does come across. That
I think so. They try to be very friendly with voters, right? That's what you're trying to.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. So the first follow-up question is to the question asked by Ricky about this Japan's official stance toward this, the war. Well, maybe war is not too strong of a word. Maybe conflict in the Middle East. So sort of like my question is driven by the poll that I've heard. The U.S. official stance is to support Israel, right? It's long been established. However, the younger generation they're surveyed, they're sort of changing their stance. Some of them say, maybe, U.S. should not side with either party, or, the more and more people are siding with Hamas because, this on the surface, Hamas started the first attack. However, it has been those attacks has been planned for a long time because of the historical reason. So my question to you, Timothy, is do we have some sort of generational gap amongst Japanese voters toward how they view about this type of conflict?
I don't know if there's a generational gap. If you look at Malaysia and some of the other countries in the region, Malaysia has the largest Muslim population in the world. They're not a whole hog against Israel, but they have a Muslim population. So there is this sentiment that the Palestinians need a state, and they've been oppressed by the Israelis, and the Israelis took their land, and look at how they treat them and that sort of thing. With the Japanese, I think people, generally speaking, people are just ambivalent about so many things that you wish they took a stronger stance on. But I think that that's representative of not just the Japanese government, but the Japanese sentiment. There's a fight like this. It's complicated. We don't know all the details. Let's just sit back. Let's, pray for peace. Let's support, humanitarian aspects which the Japanese really excel at. I think that's probably the policy of the Kishida administration too. We don't want to get too involved, but it looks like a configuration that could grow out of control. So we want to stay, make sure peace is being pursued, but Israel's going to pretty much do what it's going to do in any event, in spite of whatever recommendations they get from the United States, but certainly from Japan, because Japan is not that dominant a player. But also, my office is in Lokubangcho, and also the Israeli embassy is in my area, and I pass by it every day. And the police presence around the embassy there is just enormous. Over the last 2 weeks, there's been thousands of people collected there. The numbers are down a little bit now, but I think that's because the police presence was so forceful. But that doesn't necessarily tell you that the Japanese people indeed are opposed to what Israel is doing, or they're supporting Hamas or the Palestinians' right to have their own land, their own property. But it's interesting to observe that there's that much. On the spectrum, there is a certain amount of people that support the Palestinian state and acknowledge that the Israelis have just kind of gone overboard in protecting their own self-interest.
Yeah, that's well said. Yeah, I'm kind of echo your sentiment, Timothy. The third, my third question, the follow up is, it's very brief, so seems like everybody wants to talk about something else. So going back to Gabor's question about is Coco, is that her name?
Yes.
The sort of mayor that has to step down. My question is, so you said she violated election law by posting on YouTube. My question is, isn't that very clear that if I were her assistant, I will go and read those laws and then make sure my boss will not violate any laws. So why those things happen? That's my question.
Yeah.
Do they just want to do they really eager to be elected? That's why they said, maybe this is the borderline, maybe you can just,
So I worked on elections. When I was working in the Diet, one of the things that I participated in very heavily was elections. And the elections for lower house or for upper house, the fight between the candidates is very, very tough. And the other candidate is spying on your organization to see what you're doing and to complain and criticize and to try and attack you while you're running your campaign. So there are things that you can do that are really on the border, like you were saying. It's a violation if it's this way, but if it's tweaked a little bit, it's not a violation. And we have been involved. I've been involved in many fights like that. Sometimes you win them, sometimes you lose them. And it's like a lot of times you read about it in the United States, as long as you win the election, you can cover everything up after that. So just win the election, however you can do it. And once you've got that, then, you're in a strong position. And I think that's one of the reasons why Mr. Trump is in such a battle, because people wanted to win the election by any means possible. And once we've won, then let's take care of cleanup. So in the Koto ward, and the Diet member's name is Kimura Yayoi, by the way. Let me see. I think she's 45 years old. So she's really got a lot of, like Gabor said, can she run again? Definitely she can run again, and she probably will. Maybe not as mayor, who knows, maybe she'll go back into the lower house, but this is going to sting with her. And yes, these decisions are made in the campaign headquarters, and definitely the candidate should have known about that. And maybe it was just one of those things that we don't think anybody's going to take notice of it because it's a small campaign. It's just on YouTube. It's going to run 5 days. So that was the campaign. And maybe they just got caught. Maybe other people are doing the same thing. They weren't caught in time, and the opposition has been looking for anything they can to get her the hell out so that I can run again, because I only lost by a few points. And at least if she's out, maybe in the by-election, or maybe under the rules of Koto Ward, they say if the current incumbent loses or is kicked out because of campaign violations, then the second runner-up becomes mayor. That might be the case. I haven't looked into it that closely yet, but definitely, the staff is to blame for that sort of thing. As we saw with Miss Obuchi, 2 of her Diet secretaries were convicted and went to jail. She didn't suffer from that. And so probably, if you extrapolate from that, Miss Kimura is probably going to blame her staff, and they're the ones that authorized the payment of 140,000 yen. That's Juyon yen for a 5-day YouTube campaign. It's difficult to say right now, but maybe as this incident unrolls, so within 50 days, there's got to be a new mayor elected. I'll continue to follow up on that, but it's one of those key aspects of understanding how Japanese politics works. What are the intricacies and the machinations, and how do you become a member, and how do you lose your seat, and how is that seat filled again, and how do you get voters to be compelled enough to want to vote for you? So I hope those are the kind of building blocks that you're getting if you're consistently listening to this briefing.
I am. I'm learning a lot, and thank you. And you you have an answer for everything. Thank you. By the way, Maya, I've seen the hand raised, and I couldn't bring him or her up. So and then it seems like it disappeared. So if you have noticed that, I'm sorry about whoever who rose the hand. Sorry.
That's okay if I notice that, because I didn't notice that actually, but I will bring them up on stage. All right. Thank you, Yuka. We have another question on LinkedIn, Timothy. But before that, just a small correction. It comes from Janusz and Christopher that Indonesia, not Malaysia, has the largest Muslim population. So thank you very much, both of you, for helping us get the facts straight. It's very much appreciated. And then we have a question from Rumiko on LinkedIn, and her question there is, okay, is the political system in Japan subject to the legal system of the country? So that's the Shiho.
That's a great question, and it is, but it kind of isn't. So in the United States, you have three branches of government. You've got the executive, the judicial, and the what is it? The three pillars of the United States government.
Oh yeah, let me check it, because the words just don't come up now.
Yeah,
yes.
I should know this off the top of my head, but there's the administrative, the judicial, and the I don't know. The fifth state is usually considered to be public policy and the press, but in Japan, so the United States Supreme Court rules on different issues that are brought up. So there's a regulation that's passed. You can have an abortion at a certain point of time. People criticize that, or they don't agree with it, and that law is brought up to the Supreme Court for a review. The Supreme Court reviews it, and then they make a decision, and then that decision is passed on back to the administrative arm, the executive, which is led by the president in the United States. Here in Japan, the Supreme Court holds that kind of a role, but it doesn't have a dominant role as you would expect in other democracies. And in fact, that's partially because in Japan, the executive is held by a prime minister and the cabinet. So when people criticize the administration, the numbers come out and they say the Japanese population holds in low regard the cabinet. They don't typically criticize the prime minister because the administration is by the cabinet as a whole. So the prime minister is evaluated based on how his cabinet is doing. And that's why the prime minister always changes his cabinet to kind of increase his numbers, get some of the bad apples out, put some new blood in, maybe get a couple more women in there, burnish his image, and maybe they're going to do a good job even as cabinet ministers. So the power of the prime minister is not like the power of the president of the United States, but it is still the executive office. And the executive office in Japan has been undergoing a huge transformation over the last 25, 30 years, where if you've driven around Nagata-cho or been in Nagata-cho, you'll have noticed that the prime minister's office is a dominant space in the Diet compound. So you've got the three members' offices, you've got the Diet proper, and then you've got the prime minister's office. The prime minister's office is massive. It's 5 floors below ground and 4 floors above ground. It's got more than 500 people that work in it. It didn't used to be like that. The prime minister was the representative of the cabinet, and the cabinet responded to him, but he was like a coach, not like a ruler, not like the real leader that a presidency has. So the Supreme Court and the legal system in general doesn't, I mean, it's not on a competitive level. The bureaucracy and the administration, the executive branch of government holds far more sway, I would say, than the legal branch and the judicial branch. And you notice that if you've lived in Japan for very long, because decisions by the Supreme Court or court decisions don't receive so much press report. Although there was the boxer who, after 58 or so years being convicted of a murder, he's been in jail all this time. They've done a review, they've done gene samples, and they've turned out that, in fact, he's not the murderer of the person that he was convicted of. It does hit news from time to time, but it really is eclipsed totally by the bureaucracy and by the executive branch of the Japanese government. Sorry for the long-winded response, but I hope it explains some of the reason why the judicial branch is a little bit less involved in the hierarchy of the economy and in the administration.
Yes, thank you for that. We got a lot of help actually in Clubhouse on LinkedIn, with the 3 branches. So, and we also have the Japanese names. They came, I think, from Hiroko-san. Oh no, from Rumiko. Yes, on LinkedIn. So yes, if you want to know them, to everybody who is listening, they are in the comments of today's live stream on LinkedIn as well. And then, Christopher, thank you very much indeed for that. Your sense of humor. So if you don't mind me, Timothy, I'll read.
Please do.
So in the US, it is the confused, the clueless, and the Kardashians. So, yes. Okay, thanks a lot. It makes the mood much lighter. And we appreciate this as well, because politics is indeed a serious matter, but we like to make it a little bit more digestible or easily digestible for everybody who is here, and humor does help do that. Okay, and then with this, I would like to say that, we have exhausted all the comments and questions, Timothy. It's time for you to get free and enjoy your day. So
sorry, Maya.
Oh, yes.
You guys gonna talk about Japanese auto industry. Is that for this coming Wednesday?
Oh, yes, the auto industry. Oh, no, it is not Wednesday. It is actually, it is a recording which we're going to prepare this next week and upload it online.
Okay.
Yes, and it will be, about the state of the automotive industry here in Japan. Timothy will be the star there once again. So,
but
yes,
but also let me jump in and your comments on the script that we've been providing. I hope this tells everybody we are responsive to your questions and your issues. So this program is called Japanese Politics One-on-One. That means you talk to us as we reveal, the briefing notes, and we talk about politics and things that are going on in the Japanese economy. But a component of that is your comments and your input too. And if we're doing things that are not aligned with what it is that you expect, having woken up at 8:20, just tell us, and Maya will come in and she'll address it and fix it. And hopefully this thing is just snappy and singing, and it's something that you look forward to. And that's what we're aspiring to, so that we reward you for, giving us the time of day on a Sunday to spend with us. So I enjoy it. I want people to become more familiar and appreciative of what's going on in Japanese politics, as intricate and as kind of closed as it is, but I think it's a valuable component of understanding this country. All of us who are in this audience are married to what's going on in Japan and the Japan relationship with the rest of the world. It's just hard to decipher and it's hard to understand. So very few people do that. Maya and I have decided that this is going to be the focus of our weekly briefing, and it just went from week to week, and it just hasn't stopped, because you guys keep telling us this is something that you like and you participate in. So please provide your comments and suggestions.
Do you take a request for the topic?
Yes.
Maya has been considering promoting on Friday or Saturday. If there's a topic that you would like to hear, please let us know, and we'll put it in the hopper so that tomorrow morning Tim talks about it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, we do. So if you have any requests, you can always reach out to us on LinkedIn, YouTube as well, also via email or direct messaging on any of the platforms we have accounts on. So please feel free to do that, and you can share these requests in the comments, of course, but also via direct messages.
Okay,
Yeah,
so the range or I'm sorry. So the range of the question, does it have to be on politics? Can it be like a criminal law, or is this the politics room?
Oh no, to me it's all politics, and I love criminal law too. I love what's going on at the criminal level here in Japan. It's a pet interest of mine. I was initially a criminal lawyer when I first started getting into Japanese into law.
Yeah.
But also this Seki Hairitsu question actually came up as a consequence of our last briefing. Who hosted that question, Maya?
Well, I think it is by a user on YouTube who is called, the handle name is Yu. Yes.
So that's an example of somebody saying, could you please talk about, without much explanation or description, just Seki Hairitsu, I'm interested in that. Could you please talk about that in our next briefing, which is why we talked about it this week.
Okay, great. Because I think I'm going to do more research, but I think it's, like those punishment is sometimes very light, compared to the crimes that has been committed. And I just wanted to learn more about, the laws in Japan, and then maybe I want to compare that to US. So thank you. I may come to you with a question. Thank you.
Please do, because the crime and punishment, and for example, this bureaucrat who was retired, 70 years old, who stepped on the gas pedal instead of the brake, and killed two people. And the ruling came down this last week that he's going to pay a couple of million yen to the bereaved father, the husband. Yeah, these are important, and they're important issues to talk about. But it is, I hate to sound negative, in comparing what Japan is doing to what other countries are doing, and sometimes it comes off like that. But I'm very careful to try and not be critical of how decisions are made and what the Japanese government is doing, but just examining them and opening them up for questions. It's delicate.
Yeah, I get it. So delicate. That's not my forte, but I'm working on it. Thank you.
Yuka, I have told you many times, I very much appreciate your questions, and you're asking direct questions is actually the best thing that we can ask for, because
actually I'm not trying to be more politically correct. I'm working on it, but thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that. Well, yes. Okay. So thank you very much again. We are about to close this session. So we'll be here once again on Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock, actually, talking about investing in Japan once again. And then next Sunday at 8:20 with Timothy Langley, talking about Japanese politics and the major events here. To everybody who commented and asked questions or just made us laugh today, thank you very much indeed. We appreciate your being here with us. And again, we encourage you to share your thoughts and requests with us during the coming week. That's all for today. Timothy?
It will be a very active week. It's a 4-day work week. Culture Day is on Friday, so it's a 3-day weekend. I will be reporting to you more likely than not from the deck of the good ship Santana. I certainly hope so. It's been too long, but a 4-day work week, and there's a lot going on politically these next couple of days. So look forward to talking with you next Sunday. Thanks, Maya.
Thank you, Timothy. Now you need to put your best face again, because we are going to end the live stream. Yes.
Halloween.
Halloween.